Merci à tous d'être ici aujourd'hui. La présentation va être en anglais aujourd'hui. So, vous serez libre de poser vos questions en français à la fin, aucun problème. So, for today's talk, we'll be talking about becoming a vegan, thanks to MaryStuart, who kindly accepted our invitation. Thank you, Mary. So today's event will be recorded. That's something that you should all have seen pop up on your screen when you join the Zoom call. So meaning this will be also made available at a later point in time. The Q&A will be taking place at the very end of Mary's talk. So please wait until the very end, or you can also address your questions in the chat if you want. I'll be monitoring questions and we'll take them as they come at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, thank you, Mary, for being here. Mary, I just meant to say a few words about you before we actually start. So MaryStuart is a third-year student in environmental studies, minoring in Indigenous studies. She is passionate about climate justice, sustainability, and more recently has become interested in food security, food waste, and their intersections with climate change. She's a co-founder and organizer with a climate justice group on campus called Climate Justice U Ottawa, and is also part of the People's Republic of Delicious, a student-run food collective based at Ottawa U that serves largely vegan meals and rescues food that would have otherwise been thrown out. She loves spending free time outside and has been getting into cross-country skiing this winter. As a matter of fact, she's actually joining, she told me she's joining the U Ottawa Nordic team. So congrats for that, Mary. And thank you for accepting the Healthy and Active Campus invitation today. So up to you if you want to share your screen from now.
Perfect, thank you so much. So I'll just start sharing my screen to get this presentation started. Okay. Always the fun fiddling around. Okay, can someone confirm? Okay, perfect, you can see my screen. Wonderful. So thanks so much everyone for joining me today. I'm really excited to chat with you all. So yeah, just before I get started, I want to just briefly acknowledge that myself being in Ottawa, I'm on unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory, which means that the Algonquin peoples never agreed to share their land with settlers upon settler arrival, and never ceded their territory through any sort of treaty. And I think it's important to recognize this, especially in a presentation like today, where I'll be talking about food and a little bit about food systems that have so much to do with the land, and in recognizing that Indigenous peoples were the first stewards of the land and continue to be on the front lines of fighting the climate crisis today. So it's important that land acknowledgements move a little bit past just being acknowledgements. So I encourage everyone to just learn a little bit more about what Indigenous land they're on, and maybe a little bit about the history of the Indigenous peoples in your area. So with that, I guess I got a lovely introduction, but I'll just start by sharing that I'm someone who's always really cared about the environment. I've really been passionate about the natural world around me, and this has kind of informed a lot of the steps that I've taken throughout my life to try and reduce my own environmental impact, and just think about fitting myself within the larger picture of the natural world. And these things kind of led me to choose my program of study and then to help start a climate justice group and join the People's Republic of Delicious. So today, what I'll be talking about is just a bit of my journey to becoming vegan, a bit on what my veganism kind of looks like now, and how I eat vegan on a budget as a student. I'll be offering just some tips, some advice that I would give based on my own experiences, and then just a little brief note on kind of the environmental reasons why I chose to go vegan. So I'll start by saying, for most of my life, I've wanted to reduce my, animal product consumption. And I'd say sort of the first instance of this was when I was around 6 years old. I had a friend who was vegetarian, and I didn't really fully understand what this meant, but I thought, I'm going to go vegetarian too. So I remember coming home from school one day and telling my parents, I am going vegetarian. And my dad took me aside and said, Mary, you know that if you go vegetarian, it's actually illegal until you're 18, just like with voting. So you have to wait until you turn 18 before you can go vegetarian. Now, I'm not sure how much of this was a joke on his part. I'm also not sure if we had some kind of conversation where I was also frustrated about not being able to vote. But nevertheless, I know I was frustrated at the thought of not being able to go vegetarian. So this was my chance. I packed my things into a little like handkerchief, tied it to a stick, and thought I'm gonna run away from home because I cannot stand for this. I didn't make it past the backyard, and I did go inside for dinner that night, and that kind of stopped my attempts for a little while to go vegetarian. But then after that, in throughout my kind of youth and early adolescence, I had a few attempts where I thought, okay, now's the time. I don't really know why, but I'll go vegetarian, and normally was enticed by pepperoni pizza, or just kind of forgot that I was trying to go vegetarian and left it. So things started to change a little bit once um, as I got older, I started kind of thinking more and becoming more aware of how disconnected I felt from the food that I was eating. I would see my parents cooking meat, and became more aware of how I would be like grossed out, for lack of a better term, when I saw raw meat, but okay when it was cooked. And there was a lot of meat and animal products that I just never really liked, and I disliked being a picky eater, but I couldn't really figure out why I didn't like them. And all of this was heightened when I would visit people like some of my family that lives on a farm. I have an uncle who's a butcher, and I would see how connected they felt to their food, and how they felt okay with the fact that, they saw the food that they eat, they saw it alive on their farm, and this just made sense to them. So none of this sat well with me, but I didn't like feeling this disconnect. And then I started to get a bit more language for this when I started doing a bit more learning in high school, and I watched this documentary called Cowspiracy that folks here might have heard of. Now, I won't get too much into this documentary, as certain parts of it are a bit controversial, but what was a turning point for me was just learning about the vast scale of operations of the animal agriculture industry, and the vast environmental impact that this industry has. And then also just having some of the, I guess, treatment of animals highlighted in this documentary. So this was a big turning point for me. I also found that as I was becoming more aware of environmental problems, this idea of being able to have a bit more agency to control my own impact made a lot of sense to me, and was a little bit more motivating, rather than watching documentaries that say just talked about the issue of climate change without giving me any options of how to take action. So anyway, from that point on, I decided to become a vegetarian, and I'd call this phase kind of my I can get all my protein from cheese, right? Phase, where we see that, going vegetarian doesn't necessarily mean you're a lot healthier. So at the time, I was a student and in high school, and I was dancing up to 15 hours a week and had other extracurriculars. So I didn't really take the time to learn about cooking vegetarian meals. So I ate a lot of like, well, cheese pizza or things with cheese. Or then, as we can see in this picture here, I had times where I thought, okay, well, I'm vegetarian now, so just eat vegetables. And you can see not a lot of dressing, or not a full meal quite then. And then after high school, I had the opportunity to go on a gap year, to take a gap year before starting university, and I moved to Brussels, Belgium with my family. And so at that point, my parents kind of suggested that maybe being vegetarian wouldn't be the best idea if I wanted to do some traveling. So I sort of dropped it for that year and just was a bit more of a flexitarian. And I have to say, frites belges aren't vegetarian, so this was kind of like one impetus to be a flexitarian for the year. Um, but then in returning from Belgium, I'm not exactly sure what kind of spurred this. I think it was just a continued feeling of sort of disconnect from my food. But I decided right when I got back that I would just jump into veganism. I think part of this too is that, there's a lot of narratives around veganism, and that it's so difficult, and that you have to take a lot of time to plan things out, that I'm a little bit contrarian. So I thought, you know what, instead of sitting down and planning things out, I'll just go vegan and I'll figure it out from there. This was made a little bit more complicated by the fact that at the time I was working at a provincial park. So when I got back from my gap year, I went right into living in the middle of the forest with very little internet access. So I couldn't look up best vegan protein sources or how to get all of my vitamins. So I really would just kind of go to the grocery store and get what I thought made sense. I did do some Google searches, I promise, but a lot of that sort of summer was me figuring out what felt right in feeding my own body. You can see here from some pictures. I apologize, I don't take the greatest pictures of my food. I promise they might improve a bit over the course of this presentation, but I was eating a lot of kind of rice and beans or quinoa and some veggies. But this was sort of I guess, my start in jumping into it. And then from there, I began university at the University of Ottawa, of course. And so my journey really wasn't linear. The University of Ottawa does have vegan options at the cafeteria that I was really grateful for, though I found there wasn't a huge variety just because it is sort of one station and I was often tempted by other things. So I was kind of flip flopping a little bit in my first few months at university. But then what really kind of sealed the deal for me was my first environmental studies course that I took in my second semester. That was global environmental challenges. And so in this course, as the title might suggest, I was learning about large environmental issues, but also how they were tied to social issues. And I found that just increasingly over the course of the semester, my eco anxiety grew, and my want to do something, but I didn't know what to do. And I was looking kind of at the rest of my degree thinking, how am I going to be equipped? How am I going to become equipped with the tools to make a difference and to face these large issues? But at the end of my course, my professor gave a couple of suggestions on, ways to reduce one's impacts to mitigate the climate crisis. And the main one was changing your diet. And he showed us this video on the diet that can help fight climate change. So that kind of sealed the deal for me, made me think, you know what, I need to do this for myself. I think with my degree too, I kind of started to realize I felt a responsibility to take actions within my own life, since I'm privileged enough to be learning about the climate crisis in school and not in my daily life. So that kind of just furthered my want to be vegan and started my, I guess, real journey from here. So it's been a lot of learning, a lot of kind of fails of just figuring out what food I want to eat. So I have some less pretty pictures here and some maybe slightly prettier pictures. But I would say that since then, my diet's been more like, I'm a university student learning, much like other university students, how to live on my own and cook for myself. I just have the like maybe added complexity of being a vegan. And then in my second year of university, I kind of stumbled upon the People's Republic of Delicious. So at the time, I was working for the Undergraduate Students Union as the coordinator for a sustainability center. And outside the room where I worked happens to be this little kitchenette in the Deja Vu Lounge on second floor Morissette. And I saw this group of people there, and what PRD does is they're a club that organizes every Wednesday, and what they do is they get groceries donated to them from Urban Spice grocery store, and they get food that would have been thrown out due to cosmetic damages. So they essentially rescue that food that would have been thrown out, and they cook vegan meals with it. So it's this great group that works together, basically coming up with new recipes based on what food they have to then serve food to the U Ottawa community. So it's pretty wonderful. And this was a really great experience. I didn't get to cook as much with folks as I would have liked to, but even in just meeting the club and helping to organize a couple of events with them, it really expanded my thinking about veganism and food to going from just thinking about my own personal impact in veganism and its intersections with climate change to thinking more globally about food systems, food security, so who has access to the right kinds of food for them, and then also the implications of like food waste and its impact. So just as a kind of mini fact, if food waste were a country, it would be the world's third most highly emitting country. That's just, there's so many emissions associated with the food that we waste each year. So that kind of, this club really helped expand my knowledge. I'll briefly just mention that due to COVID, unfortunately, we haven't been able to really operate in person. Nathan, who I think is part of this call, has really been spearheading a lot of PRD's work this year. He was able to do kind of one thing in person on campus, but unfortunately all events have been canceled on campus. So we've helped organize a couple of online events, including a webinar I helped organize in October on sustainable food systems. And then we also did a little trivia night talking about food waste and tips for reducing one's food waste. So if people are interested in learning more about the People's Republic of Delicious or staying in touch with us, please follow our social media pages. Sometime at the end of this presentation, I'll be able to share a resource document with some links to their page. But it's just a great community of people. So I look forward to getting back to cooking with them. Now, from there, I also just wanted to talk a bit about how I eat vegan on a student budget. So I think there's there's kind of a narrative that going vegan requires a lot of extra time and money, and that it's like really not a cost effective option for folks. And I would say that this doesn't necessarily have to be the case. So it is for sure expensive if you're buying all of the kind of fancy vegan fake meat type products. And that being said, they can really help in transitioning to a vegan diet. But what I do is I took this picture at the grocery store on the weekend. And when you go into the grocery store, you'll see there are different kind of pockets that have your like vegan and gluten-free options a lot of the time. And when you look at the top, the kind of flashier packaging, you see a lot of Eve's brand like vegan lunch meat and that sort of thing. But then down below, I tend to go right to this section that has tofu, and I can get tofu for, one big block for around $2.30. So that's just one way that I kind of save money to get the vegan products that I need. But again, they can be helpful. So I know when I was first figuring out how to feed myself and pack vegan lunches for school, I would sometimes purchase some of these products on sale. So they can be helpful, I think, in kind of moving into reducing one's meat consumption. And then one thing that I found really exciting more recently is vegan yogurt at the grocery store, which I think is really great for like a quick breakfast. But yeah, that aside, other things that I do is I tend to buy a lot of my staples either as canned or dried goods. So I purchase a lot of chickpeas or lentils and black beans as my protein sources, again in cans or dried, and then I can cook them. Other staples I get canned would be diced tomatoes and coconut milk. And then some things that can be really cost effective to buy in bulk, such as textured vegetable protein. That's kind of a substitute for like ground beef or a nutritional yeast. And then here I also just shared a picture of my grocery shopping from last week, actually, that I did on the weekend, just to show that for around $65, I managed to get a bunch of staples that I will eat for like a number of weeks, including rice and a big bag of lentils, a few blocks of tofu, some oats for breakfast, and then some fruits and vegetables and some other things. So I've personally found that going vegan has actually reduced my grocery bill. And also just by virtue of the fact that there's a lot in the grocery store, a few different aisles that I can kind of just beeline and not even worry about like a lot of the like baked goods aisles and things. I can't eat anything from them, so I can just move on. But other things I've found to be helpful is meal prepping. So I used to kind of scoff at this idea and think, I could never eat the same thing for a week. But I've found it to be really helpful for myself, especially this year, in making sure I'm getting, enough vegetables and things to kind of plan out a couple of meals for my week and cook them on the weekend. It's also great because I can listen to a podcast at the same time and is overall a pretty enjoyable experience. I'd also say too, it's great to just find meals that you really like and stick with them as much as you'd like to, and then just add variety when you want to. So I think one thing I've found in becoming vegan is that there can sometimes be pressure, or I felt pressure to, you try out all the recipes on making jackfruit taste like meat or things like that. There's a lot of these kind of quirky things, but as a student, a lot of the time I just don't have time to try out a lot of new recipes and buy this, again, these kind of like specialty project items. And so I've become happy sticking with a few staple recipes that I really enjoy making and that have really worked for me. So I just have a couple pictures here of I've been eating this winter a lot of lentil dal, a lot of kind of rice bowls with tofu, that sort of thing. So a bit more broadly, I would say that if people are looking to go vegan or even shifting to a plant-based diet, something that's really helpful, I found, is just to think of what your personal reason is, or what your few reasons are for wanting to make this kind of shift. Again, I think there's a lot of information out there to become informed, and a lot of different opinions. So a lot of advice will say, pick your reason and then jump into it and you're set. But I think this oftentimes can place a lot of pressure on folks to feel as though they need to make a large shift, and this can maybe stop people from modifying their diets in the first place. I also think I think once people make a transition in their diet of the sort of going vegan, a lot of the time this tends to put like a spotlight on you, and it almost becomes like socially acceptable to ask any question about your diet if you're a vegan. And so I think showing yourself grace, starting at home with that can be helpful in alleviating some of that pressure. So I recognize that I'll make quote unquote mistakes, just by following the kind of guiding principles I've laid out for myself in my diet. I'd also say that it doesn't have to be all at once. You can try meat-free Mondays. You can try just finding a few recipes you'd like to try that involve fewer animal products, and just inserting them into your diet that way. And then also, it doesn't have to be full veganism. This just really depends on your reason for going vegan, or sorry, for reducing your animal product consumption. So that's just my couple little tips. And then from there, I think sometimes eating a vegan diet, or a plant-based diet, can just take a little bit of imagination, but all of the swaps are possible. So I'm sure you may have heard of the Beyond Meat burgers. Those are pretty big. You can kind of just try and eat one of those instead of a burger on occasion. There's a lot of other kind of substitutes. Instead of having a taco, you can try making a black bean or textured vegetable protein, or ground round type taco. And then in certain cases, I'm not going to be a vegan that preaches for vegan products saying that they all taste exactly like the original thing, because I think that's not the case a lot of the time. But it's totally possible to kind of expand your knowledge on other dinners and cultures and cuisines. So swapping out like a chicken breast dinner for some type of tofu curry is totally possible, and I've found quite enjoyable. So then I thought I might get the question of, what about protein? Can you get protein on a vegan diet? So I think this is kind of another sort of misconception, that, it takes so much extra work to get protein as a vegan, and it's so difficult, which I found not to necessarily be the case. So I'm not a nutritionist, but I do know that on average, people need generally around 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of their body weight in a given day. And, this varies depending on your level of like activity and your age. But a lot of protein can be found from vegan sources. And as one kind of example of what helped in me starting to think about, combining foods to get protein in my diet, was the idea of making complete proteins through pairing things. So for example, eating rice with beans creates a complete protein, peanut butter on bread, or hummus and pita. So this can really, I don't know, this helped in my thinking personally. And from there, I also have this little image that was actually created by the coach of the Ottawa Nordique team, but that just shows just how much protein can be found from so many different vegan sources. And all of these foods also have a lot of other nutritional benefits. So you can get a wide range of proteins and all 9 amino acids that are necessary for protein from vegan sources through eating a combination of, beans, seeds, nuts, and tofu is a really good one. So here I just gave kind of an example of like a daily a diet, I guess, meal plan kind of thing of your average like breakfast, lunch, and dinner on a vegan diet that can actually amounts to about 20 grams of protein per meal. So this is, totally feasible. And if that doesn't convince you, I'll just say, like, from my personal experience, I've found that I've been able to figure out a diet that works for me, that is vegan, and that has allowed me to remain quite active. So, I've eaten vegan while going on camping trips of long days of hiking or canoe camping. As was kind of mentioned at the start of the presentation, I started getting much more into cross-country skiing this year. And so I've done I've done some of the longest skis of my life that have been fairly strenuous. On a vegan diet, and felt okay. I promise that fall was not a lack of protein related fall. It was just a Mary being clumsy fall. And then the picture in the middle is a not great picture, but from snacks that I made for this weekend when I had a quite active day of about a 12-kilometer trail run and followed by a 10-kilometer hike, which feeling tired but felt fueled on a vegan diet. So that's my mini testament to how it is possible, even when you're just kind of figuring things out for yourself. Um, and then here, again, in this kind of resource document I'll share at the end, I follow certain people to get some recipes. Other times, what I do a lot of is I'll read a recipe kind of once or twice, and then I'll just kind of riff off it and find what works for me and see how I can tailor it, just changing up like what vegetables I use and spices and that sort of thing. But a few people that I follow that have been helpful in finding recipes have been Pick Up Limes. They're based in the Netherlands, I believe, but they have YouTube videos where they share recipes and a blog where they share a lot of recipes and information on like proper nutrition as a vegan and this sort of thing that I've found to be really helpful. There's also Avant Garde Vegan that shares some quite fancy recipes, but also has videos and information on meal prepping that I found to be helpful as a student. And then the other one I wanted to highlight was Minimalist Baker. Has recipes. Not all are vegan, but it has they have a pretty wide selection of vegan recipes. And you can also on their website kind of search by like recipes that will take under 20 minutes or recipes that use fewer than 25 ingredients or fewer than 20 ingredients. So I found that to be quite helpful. And then I'd also just say that there's so much more out there to explore and discover. So if you're looking to kind of shift your diet a bit, you're so far from being alone, and there are a lot of resources that you can access. So then briefly, just for like the last little bit of my presentation, I wanted to share a couple of facts just since a few times I've mentioned that, the environment and environmental impact of the animal agriculture industry has led to me wanting to go vegan. So, this presentation is not to try and convince all of you that you should go vegan to save the planet today at all. I just want to share some facts that I have found to be interesting and fairly illuminating. So the first one would just be in thinking in terms of land use. About half of the world's habitable land is actually used for agriculture. Just as population has increased and as our consumption has increased, I'd say especially in the global north, and that about 77% of that agriculture land is used for livestock and for the meat and dairy industry. So used for pastures for grazing and land that's used to grow crops in order to feed animals that are then consumed by humans. So this is quite huge, and we see here in this graph next to it how we see like how the land use for animal products is quite high compared to that for other food products. And from that, there are emissions associated with it. So we also see that the world's food production accounts for 26% of global emissions, that's quite high. And of that, 31% of those emissions are directly due to livestock and fish farms. And then in this graph again, next beside it, we see this just shows sort of the emissions associated with different kinds of food and how beef especially, but a lot of meat is kind of at the top of that. So different studies have said varying things. I think it's the situation is much more complicated than just the emissions are from meat, so we just have to stop eating meat entirely. But studies have shown that if the whole world were to go vegan, this could reduce global emissions or human created emissions by up to 70% by 2050. So this just kind of shows how everybody reducing their meat consumption by a little bit or going vegetarian can actually have a tangible effect on our total emissions. And so that's just kind of something to consider. But of course, there are a lot of other considerations as well. So I am aware of the fact that um, there is a carbon footprint associated with the diet that I eat. So if I'm eating bananas or avocados, those have been flown from somewhere else in the world. And a lot of things I eat, such as, avocados as an example, require a lot of water to be grown. So there is an impact associated with this. However, it seems that if we're looking just at land use and emissions, just going based on animal product consumption, reducing that overall will reduce kind of your share of emissions. Though ideally, I would like to be eating, mainly plant-based, but also as locally as possible. So, trying to grow a lot of my own food, or, purchasing um, from within the community, and closer to myself. So I see my veganism right now in this stage as being kind of like a product of where I'm at as a student, and in terms of my current knowledge, but this is something that will kind of change and evolve. And so, yeah, with that, and to frame things in kind of the larger picture, um, all of these kind of issues are also just they're a product of our global food system that has many other problems, like in terms of the soil management, and other things that have to do with agriculture. And so this is just kind of like one slice of the pie. And then it's good to note too that are kind of possible regenerative agriculture practices, even for the animal agriculture industry, that can greatly reduce its environmental impact. So I have a picture here of some cattle in sort of a forest, that's like a picture of silvopasture that integrates trees, pasture, and forage into a single system to create a kind of a smaller environmental impact. So just to say that, just to kind of highlight how veganism has led to me learning a lot more about the global food system, about different issues pertaining to it. And this has been really helpful in sort of, I think, my path and development as a student in environmental studies, but also just in trying to be more of a conscious consumer. And so with that, I won't read these definitions out loud, but it's kind of, veganism, I think, has broadened the lens through which I view food and our food system, to thinking also about, food justice, food security, and food sovereignty, and thinking more about, how can other folks in the world, how can we ensure they have access to food, and to agency over their food systems. So that's ending on a fairly broad note, but I kind of wanted to do that just to show that, I think it's good to do your research before you change your diets, but that it is totally possible. I think I'm a kind of good example that it's totally possible to figure things out as you go along. It's okay to not jump into things right away, and to take your time to figure out what works best for you in terms of reducing your animal product consumption. But I would say that it's, can be really enriching in the end. So that's what I have prepared in terms of my slides today. I'm really happy to just have a conversation with folks, to answer questions to the best of my abilities, or to just kind of, discuss anything about veganism. So thanks very much, everyone. I will stop my screen share.
Thank you, Mary. I'll start sharing mine. So we're now, everybody can see my screen fine?
Yes.
Seeing it fine, perfect. So we're at the Q&A session now. We'll take questions as they came. I can see already one from John in the chat. Thank you so much, Mary, by the way, for at least enlightening me. It was excellent, I found. So one question that came from John in the chat is, so how do you approach conversation about veganism with your friends when they ask you about becoming a vegan?
Yeah, thanks, John. That's a really pertinent question. And I might broaden it too, to talk about how I kind of have conversations with my family as well. I'd say for me, I know in this presentation I gave kind of probably a lot of information, a bit of a wide array, but I try to keep conversations fairly simple, to not overwhelm friends, because I know it's not very helpful, I think, in transitioning your diet or in influencing others to just, yell a bunch of scary facts at people. you can kind of introduce things a little bit more slowly. I also like to phrase conversations in terms of just sharing, what's worked for me and the way I think about things, to not be kind of imposing my views or thoughts on others. To allow others to kind of form their own opinions on the topic. And then I'd say, kind of with my family, that it's been much of the same, and maybe just a little bit of persistence of, this is what I've learned about veganism, and this is what I've learned about the animal agriculture industry, and here's some way that you could reduce your impact if you wanted to, and presenting options to them I've found to be pretty helpful too. So I think just remaining fairly gentle with people and framing things, from your own perspective can be helpful in those kinds of conversations. Even if you're someone, like, I know I've become a bit more passionate about, my feelings about animal agriculture and about veganism, it can be helpful to just, keep that framing things in the first person. I hope that answers a little bit.
Perfect. Thank you. Another question that just came in from Ezekiel. Mary, do you have any recommendation of vegan snacks that you have liked for, during, or after a workout?
Yeah, another really great question. I am a big fan of making little vegan snacks. I had one picture of them of date balls. So having something for, like, maybe during a workout, on a break, or a little bit before, something that has like a lot of protein and some like nice kind of natural sugar in them, of like dates, peanut butter, maybe some seeds as well in them. I also am a super big fan of green smoothies. So I like making sort of banana smoothies, but adding in extra veggies of like kale or spinach. So those are just some of my favorite, like, very simple snacks for before and during a workout.
Thank you. Lots of positive, very positive comments. There's a question coming from Nathan, I believe. He's got his hand raised. Did you want to ask?
Yes, thank you. First of all, great talk, Mary. Um, I like hearing some parallels in our journey in being vegan. And I think like being vegan by itself is like a form of advocacy, since like everyone asks us why we went vegan. And it's a great way to kind of educate the people in our life. And I think we both agree that not everyone has to become vegan. Um, but like we both want for most people to at least reduce their animal product intake far more than we are doing today. And I want to ask if you've had any success in convincing any of your family or friends in either reducing their animal intake or even just eating less beef.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nathan, and thanks for attending today. I think first, I really like that you said that veganism is a form of advocacy and even just informing your close circle, and that's exactly how I view it. So I don't see, like, I personally am not part of any groups that, like, are, I guess, more like militant in their veganism, and I don't try and force my views, but I do think that just making these shifts in your own life can allow you to impact those around you, just in the conversations that you have, and that I've actually have had some success in this. So I think my mom joined this presentation today, and we've had a lot of kind of conversations, and I think I've had a bit of an impact on the way she views food and larger food systems, and I think my family has started to take some steps to reduce their overall animal product consumption. And I did mean to say this at the beginning of the presentation, that since the first little stint of being told I couldn't become a vegetarian until I turned 18, my family has become very supportive of my veganism. And so yeah, in short, they have taken some steps to reduce their animal product consumption. And I like to think that just through conversations with friends, I've helped sort of broaden some of their thinking. And in certain cases helped reduce some of their animal product consumption, which is just, really exciting.
It's great to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Nathan, for your question. We've got another one in the chat from Elizabeth. So how have you navigated eating out with family and friends? And can you find vegan options easily when you go out for a restaurant?
Yeah, this is another really good question. I'd say um, I've had to find certain places where I um, really enjoy the vegan food. I'd say that increasingly nowadays, you'll be able to find a vegan option at the vast majority of restaurants. Whether they'll be really tasty or not kind of depends on where you end up going. So I definitely have found kind of some ways of like compromising. So I know at the start of the pandemic, I was back home living with my family, and we would do some nights we would do takeout to support some local businesses. So on those nights, my family might get food from one place and I would get my food from a vegan restaurant. Other times we all kind of compromised and got food from a specifically vegan restaurant. So I would say that sometimes it takes a little bit of searching, but generally you can find options anywhere, and there are some nice gems. Like I know in Ottawa, I personally am a fan of Pure Kitchen, that is a vegan restaurant. I think they have a couple of locations, but I know for sure one's on Elgin Street. And so again, it's kind of just an interesting thing to navigate in the end. But the options are out there.
Perfect, thank you. We had a hand raised earlier from, yeah, she pulled her hand down, so I'm guessing the question is gone now. So we'll go to Liliana's question in the chat then. So she's thanking you for your presentation, as many others. And Liliana was wondering whether you have any thoughts on iron deficiency.
Yeah, really good question. So, um, from the reading that I've done, so again, I'm by no means a nutritionist. I know that the iron deficiencies is something that can happen to vegans if they're not eating like a wide enough range of food in their diet. So I've heard that eating a lot of leafy greens is really helpful. Eating some beans and maybe some products fortified in iron can be really helpful. But I also do know of some vegans that end up taking iron supplements, and that this can be quite helpful. So I'd say that this just comes down to it ends up being a very personal thing. I haven't had issues with iron deficiency since going vegan. I just try and make sure I'm eating a variety of fruits and vegetables. But it's something to definitely like remain conscious of, and know that there are different options out there for vegans. And more broadly speaking, I'll just say that I think the only things I've really heard that vegans might need to supplement would be B12, which is something that I take supplements for, and then also omega 3s. It's really important to make sure you're eating enough like chia seeds and flax seeds, and say certain kinds of nuts to make sure you're getting enough of those fatty acids. Otherwise, from what I've read, a vegan diet that's varied enough can kind of cover all of the essential nutrients and vitamins.
Thank you, Mary. And when you're saying compensating with nuts, what do you do? There's a question from Julia in the chat asking, how do you think difficult the transition to a vegan diet would be for someone with a severe nut allergy?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So this is something I can't picture navigating myself because I love peanut butter so much. I have heard of people doing it. So I think if you're able to get enough protein, if you like beans, there's such a wide variety of different beans and legumes, like lentils, that you can eat to get a really good source of protein, as well as tofu. And there are other vegan products such as like seitan and tempeh. And so I think it is totally possible. It would just be important. Like a lot of the time when I eat nuts, it'll be for a snack or something. And as I said earlier, around like working out and this sort of thing. So it might be important to find some kind of alternative for like times between meals, and to get some like quick energy, which I think can come from things like, I don't know, just thinking off the top of my head, like baked chickpeas or something else that's high in protein. I also know that, I don't know, Julie, if you've tried this, but there's kind of like nut-free butter substitutes like wow butter. And if you can have like sunflower seeds, there's sunflower seed butter, which I've tried before and I'm a fan of. So there are a lot of alternatives out there, and I think they're increasingly accessible.
Thank you. Yeah, same question along the same lines, but someone with an allergy of to tofu, how would she work around that?
Yeah, this one's also tricky, and I would ask too whether it's to tofu or to soy more broadly, because it is true that there's a lot of vegan products that are soy. Yeah, so that is tricky because you have soy milk and you have edamame and you have tofu. So again, on that, I would say that this obviously makes things more difficult, and you definitely will have reduced options in terms of what products you can buy in store of like packaged vegan meals or things like that. But I would just again kind of suggest looking at recipes that include more like a variety of vegetables and beans and legumes, and then for you maybe more seeds and nuts as like snacks and things. But it is true that this kind of reduces the variety. But so it's a bit of a trickier situation. And this is when I also come back to, it's not a kind of like one size fits all of like going vegan. That's not the way I kind of suggest it. I think it's a lot about figuring out what works for you. And yeah, a challenge for sure. I know in a couple of cases, I at one point felt like I was having a bit of a sensitivity to soy, to make a long story short. And so I purchased some local eggs for like a couple of weeks. So I think there's also options to try and source some animal products as locally as and sustainably as possible when you need to substitute things while still working to reduce your kind of overall consumption. So I hope that's at least a little bit helpful in terms of advice.
Extremely helpful, I find. I think Josiane will agree. Yeah, there was the hand was raised earlier by by Patricia. Patricia, if you still have a question, if it's the time to ask it. If not, we'll go to your number one fan, Christine Purdon. I think she's your mom. She says the following: upon hearing one is vegan, many people interpret it as a rebuke of their habits and become offensively defensive, interrogating you to see if you are consistent or pure in your practice. For example, oh, but why do you wear leather then? So engaging in this is both unnecessary. It's really none of their business. You never interrogate them about their diet, and draining. So your mom's question is, what is a good strategy for politely shutting it down? Those types of questions.
Yeah, this is something I'm still kind of working to navigate. I think one thing I try and just kind of laugh things off a lot of the time, and so I try and remain fairly relaxed about my diet. So when I get a lot of those kinds of questions, I tend to kind of deflect them by just saying, like, oh, I'm doing what I can, just I'm doing what's possible for me at this point in time. Um, I try not to get too caught up in letting this turn into any kind of heated debate because I don't always see like a real I guess like positive outcome of that sort of thing. I think it also just depends too on the situation and the way you're being interrogated. Because if it's someone that's asking in just a curious way about like why the belt I'm wearing is leather, but I'm a vegan, and it's just purely for like informational reasons, that could be a chance to kind of like help educate someone. But if it is just a very kind of like defensive thing meant to shut down veganism, I try to just almost laugh off questions and then change the subject or just answer in a very short manner.
I think that's the spirit. Yeah. Thank you, Mary. I don't see any more hand raised or any other questions in the chat. If anyone has a question, now is the time to ask. Going once, going twice, I don't see any more. So I just meant to, once again, on behalf of the Healthy and Active Campus, I would like to say a big thank you, big thank you to you, Mary, for your time and your dedication and for giving us this great piece of advice today. So our next Lunch and Learn will be taking place on May 18th. As with a workshop on ergonomics. That's going to be the French one, and the next day we're going to have the same in English. So once again, if there's not any more questions, I don't see any more in the chat. Thank you all. I wish you all a pleasant day. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye. Thank you.